Hi, everyone. I want to answer a question that I received in the mail. So I'm going to read the question. Would you be able to advise me which course of Birthing Better Skills might be the most appropriate for a potential unassisted birth? My previous births have been rather quick, and now, for our third, we live quite away from a hospital, and there are no home birth midwives available. So I'd like to prepare for any scenario. So let's put aside which resource for a moment, and let's talk about what's become known as unassisted births. When I gave birth in 1970, that wasn't a term. In fact, it wasn't a term in 1980 when I gave birth. But it became known as free birth or unassisted birth. Excuse me, I'm going to scratch my nose. Okay, so I need to get really clear with everybody about what this means. We never know what our birth is going to be like. That's just it. That's the reality globally. It's always been that way. We don't know what kind of birth we have. And that means we can't really plan for the birth we do have. So the person who's writing to me has had 2 previous births, and they've been fairly quick. But even if they hadn't been quick, the next birth may not be anything like the previous births. Every family needs to prepare for giving birth anywhere, whether it's in the parking lot of a hospital, whether it's at home, whether it's in the woods, wherever. Birth just happens. Many of us plan where we're going to birth, with whom we're going to birth, as though we can plan it. And we can't plan it. But this woman is asking an important question. If she and her partner intentionally choose to stay at home where there is no birth provider coming to them, what should she be preparing for? And it really boils down to simple and practical. And this is called the gift of fear. Now, most of us have been taught, certainly since I gave birth in 1970, based on Grantley Dick Reed's book, Childbirth Without Fear, that we shouldn't be afraid of birth. And that's been reinforced by the natural birth movement, which is women have always given birth. There's no reason to be afraid of it. We know what to do. However, I've spent many, many years in traditional cultures, and I can tell you all traditional cultures have high anxiety around pregnancy, birth, the newborn period, and up until the age of 5, because things happen. When we use the word normal, natural, and physiological around pregnancy and birth, it's interpreted by the natural birth movement as to mean it's a no-brainer. Very rarely do problems occur or tragedies occur. So just trust it. Don't worry about it. It's not going to happen to you. Whereas traditional cultures and the medical profession take a more nuanced viewpoint of the words normal, natural, and physiological to mean anything that might happen could happen. So in traditional communities, every traditional culture has a healthcare system, and that healthcare system has a strong emphasis around pregnancy and around the newborn period. There's a beautiful book you can get on Amazon. It's French, coffee table book called Babies Celebrated. And it explains how cultures view this, babies after the birth. They all consider it very vulnerable. In fact, we are hardwired as humans to be anxious around pregnancy, childbirth, the newborn period, and up to the age of 5, because it's a very, very vulnerable period. And for modern people to say, don't worry about it, really misses the point. It's a very vulnerable period. And the reason we don't worry about it so much is that when we have a problem, we wander off to the medical profession, who has developed lots and lots of skills, assessments, monitoring procedures around this period. All humans, every human culture used to lose between 20 and 30% of children before the age of 5. And in every traditional culture, The global goal number one is a live mother, not a live baby, because cultures know that babies can die at birth, and pretty much they're okay with that. And when you look at Baby's Celebrated book, they talk about not really seeing young babies as fully invested in this world. They're very vulnerable. So people have a innate cellular response to pregnancy, birth, and the newborn period up to the age of 5, which is an anxiety. And we have to acknowledge it. Because we're being told, don't be afraid, we get conflicted about what that anxiety is. So what I want to explain is it's a gift of fear, which means you can develop a relationship to this. And what this person is asking is, how do I know if anything's wrong? And that question is very good. That is what we need to pay attention to. So there's a rule of thumb. If you are in labor or in pregnancy or after the birth and you feel that something is terribly wrong, you don't need to have anybody validate that. If you feel something is terribly wrong and that you or your baby could be dead in 5 minutes or up to 12 hours, do something or seek help. So in other words, you might plan a home birth with midwives coming to you. However, if you feel there is something not okay, do something or seek help. You do that if your partner fell off the roof. If they fell off the roof and you went, that is scary, and the behavior that I see is I feel this person is at risk within 5 minutes or 12 hours, you would do something or seek help. And it's no different whether you're pregnant or giving birth. This is the gift of fear. If you feel that something is seriously wrong or could go wrong in 5 minutes to 12 hours, do something or seek help. And the do something means have skills, learn skills to help yourself. CPR is one of them. The Heimlich maneuver is another one. Knowing how to bandage a wound is one of them, right? So when you're thinking about, I might give birth without a birth professional, understand that if everything feels fine, you're just like the women who are giving birth in the back of a taxi or next to a rice paddy. It happens. So if something seriously isn't going to happen in 5 minutes to 12 hours, and you can cut that down sometimes to 2 hours or 3 hours, the next phase of that is paying attention until the situation changes. People who are taught don't be afraid, they're very often very nervous, particularly with their newborns and their first babies. Every time the baby moves, is something the matter? Is something the matter? But if women were taught and men were taught the gift of fear in pregnancy, then they would have paid attention to the things that are bothering them. And if something is bothering them, but they don't feel that they are at risk or their baby's at risk within 5 minutes or a few hours, they would just pay attention. And paying attention helps you get to the place where either it's gotten worse, in which case you do something or get help, or it's gotten better and you just chill out. So it's really important to develop the gift of fear. And the person who sent me this email, that's the same thing. If everything seems fine, then just let it be fine. If something feels like it's a major problem, then do something or get help. Now, giving birth is not where the problem lies. When I'm in traditional communities, often there is a difference between the nurse midwives or the direct entry midwives that are in the health system and the traditional midwives that are not in the health system. The medical profession has a list of criteria that are considered to be risk factors. That's understandable. So the medical profession considers a prolapsed cord to be a risk factor. In traditional communities, all of them, all different cultures, they do not consider that to be a problem. Their concern is a live mother. Their concern is not a live baby. If the prolapsed cord ends up with a dead baby, that woman will probably have another baby. They don't even know what to do about it. So they would just let the birth proceed. The two concerns in traditional communities is if the baby gets stuck and doesn't come out. Because what happens then? The baby eventually dies and the mother eventually dies. Or if a woman bleeds too much, not so much right after the birth, but the bleeding that can go on for days where her cardiovascular system is drained. So I really want to address this in response to the question. If your labor is moving along and you feel fine, it is what it is. However, women's lives are more at risk once the baby is out. Now, the person who sent me this email had 2 quick births. Doesn't mean this is going to be a quick birth. So once again, you're back into the gift of fear. If this birth is not quick and it lingers, do you feel there's a problem that is putting you or your baby at risk? In which case, do something or seek help. But let's assume that this birth moves along fine and the baby is born. In modern natural birth movement, the idea is leave the cord. That's very good. In traditional communities, they leave the cord until the placenta comes out. That's not true in either home births or in hospital births or birth center births. They can often wait a little bit, but then they will cut the cord and separate the baby. Since the 1980s, the idea is get the baby to the breast. In traditional communities, that is never, ever, ever, ever the behavior, ever. After the baby is born, the baby is put on its stomach, and that allows the baby to drain. If it's in a puddle of amniotic fluid, something dry is put under the baby, and the mother waits. Why does she wait? Because a mother's life is most at risk when the uterus is changing from having had a baby into it to having to come down more and more and more to eventually expelling the placenta and then reducing more. If you've never seen a woman bleed at a birth, you do not want to see it, honestly. And you do not want the mother to be at risk. So at home births, what we do is just put the baby on its belly on something dry, and we wait. We also have mixed up a room temperature 4 liters of water that is slightly salty and slightly sweet, just to taste. That is oral rehydration, goes into the cells. A woman bleeding is at risk if her cardiovascular system gets depleted. That's when she goes into shock. During pregnancy, women have about 50% more blood volume. So we can lose quite a bit of blood. But if we don't replace the fluids, then we are at risk of going into shock. So if a woman bleeds at a birth, we drink 3 times what we think is going out right away, because a woman can be anemic. That's fine. That's fine. But she hasn't depleted her cardiovascular system. So at an unassisted birth, a birth by itself, or when somebody is there, we leave the baby on its belly. You can dandle with the baby, that's fine, but wait until the placenta comes out and have the oral rehydration with you. And if you're bleeding, drink 3 times the volume. You'll be anemic when you're tested, perhaps, but you won't go into shock. Now, women are moving from 9 months of pregnancy to not being pregnant. And when does that occur? And how do we know that pregnancy and birth is over with? And it's simple. If a woman can get up, stand up normally, and walk to the toilet and come back standing up normally, she's finished with the birth and she knows it. Some women can do that really quickly. The majority of us, we can't do that quickly. What is labor? It is hard work. And when the baby is born and the uterus is coming down, our whole biochemistry, our whole energetics is changing. Modern medicine rushes that. The natural birth movement tries to expand it a little bit, but what they do instead is to distract the woman from herself by asking her to put the baby on the breast. No traditional culture around the world nurses on a dry breast. None of them nurse cholesterol. None of them do, because they know that when a baby is on a dry breast, the baby sucks and sucks and sucks and sucks, and this leads to cracked nipples. And women do not like to nurse. It's very painful, and she's more likely to get an infection if she has a cracked nipple. So no traditional communities nurse after the birth or until the milk comes in. They may send the baby to a wet nurse, or they may have other ways to put fluid into the baby to clean out the system, but they don't nurse. So, and you can do it by mouth, put fluids in your mouth and let the baby suck off it. But after the birth, when the baby is just lying down and you can touch it and be with it and talk to it, as a woman, take your time. When the placenta comes out, pay attention to how much bleeding is occurring. If the placenta doesn't come out, the uterus will rise above the belly button, okay? And that's when the blood is backed up behind it. And so when the placenta comes out, out comes this gush of blood as well. An initial gush of blood is not as dangerous as the bleeding the next day, the next day, the next day. But if you're hydrating, little salt, little sweet, raspberry leaf tea, and drinking, if your lips are dry, your mouth are dry, you drink, swallow, don't gulp, don't sip, you gulp, gulp, gulp until your stomach says full, and you do it again, you repeat it, you keep your cardiovascular system full. So when the placenta comes out, there's also a period of time. Once again, if a woman can get up and walk up straight to the toilet and walk up straight after the birth, she will tell you, I'm finished. And some women do this really quickly within 20 minutes. Others, it takes a few hours. Honestly, it can take a few hours. It's important for the woman to stay upright. What we often see is after the baby is born, people lie back. That allows the uterus to fill with blood. You don't want that. And then she gets a gush of blood and everybody goes into panic mode. Stay upright so that gravity pushes the uterus down. If you want to lightly massage your belly and your uterus and feel it contract, you can do that. Putting the baby to the breast distracts the woman's attention, and we see a lot of women bleeding in hospital because she's paying attention to trying to get the baby to latch on. Now, people will say latching on contracts the uterus. It does, but it is distracting to the energetics of the birth and moving from the birth into now moving into parenting. So if you decide that you're going to birth without a birth professional, women have done that for hundreds of thousands of years, right? It's a good idea to have some friends with you who have some skills, who can mix up that fluid, make certain you're drinking sufficiently enough if you're bleeding, paying attention with you, being able to talk to you about what you're seeing and what you're feeling. And always remember the bottom line. If you feel there is a problem within 5 minutes or a few hours, do something or get help. No different than falling off a roof or anything else, or being sick. If your kid is sick and they look unnatural to you, do something or get help. So which of the Birthing Better resources should you get? Well, ultimately, I don't know anything about this woman's previous birth. So I, in some ways, can only say to her, get the complete course, because that's all the skills that fathers and mothers and I developed in the 70s, 80s. And there, it's a comprehensive set of very diverse skills to use. Those skills are used to work through the activity of birthing your baby. They do not address this post-birth period. That is often out of our hands. If a midwife comes to your home, she will have her own protocol. If you're in a birth center or the hospital, they will have their own protocol. But at home births, where you are on your own, whether by intention or accident, put the baby on its belly. If you can get something dry underneath it, that's fine. You can cover the baby's body, that's fine. You can dandle with the baby. Just let everything calm down and wait until the placenta comes out. And then wait until you feel you can get up and walk to the toilet in a normal fashion and come back in a normal fashion. There are women who can walk to the toilet normally, but just going to the toilet and getting up again exhausts their primal energy, and they come back and they start bleeding. So we always mix up 4 liters of warm oral rehydration, slightly salty, slightly sweet, and then the woman drinks 3 times the volume of the fluid she feels that she's losing. We have had, in my lifetime, some very serious bleeds. None of those women went into shock. Okay, replacing fluid, that's what an IV does. And in some cultures, they give you enemas because it absorbs through the intestines very quickly. You don't want to go into shock. That puts the mother at risk, and you do not want the mother to be at risk. Once the woman feels okay, then cut the cord quite a distance from the baby's body. You can do anything you want. You can hold it, rub it, do what you want. If you want to put it to the breast, not my way of doing things, not what we learned from traditional communities. And what we learned was you want to prevent cracked nipples. And so it's time. Time expands. There's no rush. Pay attention. And if everything seems okay, then just keep being in the present. If you want to clean the baby out and not nurse, then give it fluid by mouth. Just put fluid in your mouth, let it suck off your mouth. It's fine. Do you know how much fluid a newborn takes? 1 tablespoon. That's a tiny amount. Your milk will come in 2 or 3 days if you hydrate. Hydrate. How do we know that? Because milk is made from blood. And when you are dehydrated, your blood is kind of thick, so it doesn't have the abundance to create milk. So if you're going to purchase one of the Birthing Better skills for an unassisted home birth, then purchase the complete course. And if you have any questions, just ask them on our YouTube channel and I'll respond.